Okay, so let's get started. I'm super excited for this. And then, as always, if you guys have any like specific questions or anything, make sure to kind of note that down. And yeah. Okay, so this workshop is run by the Youth Empowerment Society. Most of you might be from there. If not, welcome to our community. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about kind of innovation, and then when Andra comes, she'll be talking about app design. So here's a quick run through of like the innovation engineering process. As you guys may know, if you guys have been doing like engineering or design for a while, there's like this cycle where you define a problem, you want to research and brainstorm, develop and design, test and get feedback, and there's like this iteration process that goes with it afterwards. And then you can come out with various prototypes, test them, and then that leads you to kind of like your final product. Um, and one thing I do want to mention with this engineering aspect is that you definitely don't need to reinvent the wheel. And there's going to be one kind of tactic or one kind of area that I will be sharing with you today, which is biomimicry, that really emphasizes on that you don't need to reinvent the wheel kind of idea. I think something that can like hinder people creating or hinder people wanting to innovate or engineer is this idea that like, oh, the product or the solution you make has to be like this novel, like no one has thought about it kind of thing, if that makes sense. And obviously the item that you're kind of making has to be unique. It can't be like exactly the same as something else. But trying to get this novel idea is super, it's probably like almost nearly impossible because first of all, if it's a good idea, somebody else probably has already thought of it. So yeah, definitely there's this idea of like not needing to reinvent the wheel, and that's going to be embedded throughout our workshop today. So first of all, I want to touch on biomimicry. So biomimicry is a practice that I really, really like, and it's one that I've been working with for a while, and I have quite a lot of experience with. Um, does anyone know what biomimicry is? If so, you can like do like thumbs up or something, or if you even feel inclined to, you can unmute and say what it is. Um, oh yeah, so Bernice knows what it is. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Um, Yeah, so for those of you, everyone else who doesn't know what biomimicry is basically the mimicking of nature to make something. So you would see like nature's aspect in one way and then be like, hey, like I can make a product or a solution from that. So these are some examples, and I can go into showing you, and I also have some screenshots from my past work. So as you can see here, this is, I'm pretty sure this on the, wait, can you guys see my cursor or no? I'm actually not quite sure. Anyways, I
Yeah,
have,
we can.
okay, thanks. So here there's like, these are like termite mounds, I think. And then here we have basically some insects like make these mounds. And then here we have these are like, oh, I forget what they're called, but I don't know if you guys have you guys ever gone like hiking or something and you have like these little like spiky things that get stuck on your clothes. It's like, yeah, I don't know, somehow I'm currently blanking out on the name of this. It's like it's not a spore, that's like for mushrooms. Okay, so but you guys probably know what I'm talking about. It's like when you go hiking, sometimes like these little like, oh, it's just like a spur, like it gets stuck on your clothes. It has like these little like hooks. And then here we have a kingfisher bird. Um, so these are some examples of biomimicry in our, real world today. Um, and then here are the things that it was, scientists looked at those various inspirations and designed these. So essentially, this on the left hand bottom corner, we have like these buildings inspired by these mounds. So if you look at these mounds, there's a way, there's like you I haven't studied it a lot because I haven't done like a specific design off of this, but this is an example. Like they saw like the structure of this. Um, there's like a ventilation system within this because I'm pretty sure these I don't know if it's like an ant or these bugs that live in these mounds. Like it's a pretty hot region, so this is their way. The structure of their house is like the way that they cool the habitat that they live in or their living environment. And similarly, the architectures or the engineers or those who designed this building were inspired by those mounds, and then they have this very interesting, as you can see, like these holes at the top shape, kind of like a chimney sort of, and a lot of various other details that mimics that to help these buildings cool like by themselves without like energy or electricity. So this is a real building. I forget where it is. It might be like in the Middle East, or I'm actually not quite sure. I remember where it was before, but yeah, this is a real building. You guys can probably search it up afterwards. And then here, this is Velcro. And yeah, if you didn't know, Velcro was produced by Biomimicry. So the person who invented Velcro, the story goes that he was walking his dog, and then when they came back, he saw like these spurs on his dog's fur. And he realized, as you can see when you go back, these spurs have very, very tiny hooks, and that sticks on your clothing, on fur, on anything that's kind of like hairy and or has like craziness to it or has some like little hairs, if that makes sense. And similarly, that's really how Velcro works. Like on one side, if you look at it very, very closely, there are these tiny, tiny, very small hooks. And on the other side, it's kind of like mimicking that fur or the texture of clothing. And then similarly, this on the right top top right corner, there's a bullet train um, in Japan, and this was actually inspired by the kingfisher bird. So um, because so they created this bullet train essentially, but then every time it passed the tunnel, it would create this huge booming sound because it wasn't very aerodynamic. And then so they actually studied the kingfisher bird specifically. And then when the kingfisher bird dives, like there's like this way, like the that the air and the wind like flows around it, and the shape of its like beak and its head was what really inspired them to create this shape, and that like solved the issue. So biomimicry is like embedded in our everyday lives, even if you don't know it or haven't been very conscious of it, and that's like super cool. And then so one example of like a project or my past work, I actually did this one when I was in middle school, so it was quite a while ago. But essentially, identified a problem that I cared about. So I was born in Taiwan, and I only moved here a few years ago, going into middle school. And then when I learned of like a lot of these flash flooding issues in Taiwan that affects a lot of rural communities. I decided I wanted to do something with it, and or I wanted to help, be a part of the solution, or at least design something to help spread awareness about this issue. So identified a problem, and then I worked with one of my very best friends in middle school, and we were working on this project together. So essentially, we looked at a lot of various you know, animal designs. We looked at, as you can see, like beaver fur. So beaver fur, release oil from their glands, and they basically we looked at all these different mechanisms of animals and plants. For instance, for the box pattern geckos, their like gecko skin is actually super. They have these very small, as you can see, very small, tiny, tiny hairs or spinnules. And then so because of this, the water on the gecko skin rests on the air pockets made by these tiny, tiny spikes. So it makes it very, very like kind of resistant to like getting wet, if that makes sense. And for instance, that could be an inspiration for like a water coat, or no, not a raincoat, or something that needs to be like water repellent or waterproof. So we use this to think about how we wanted to make our solution. We were designing a residential unit. How do we make it especially waterproof, since when there's like flash floods, a lot of the time like houses are completely soaked through, and like the walls are kind of like all like broken and molded, especially like in Taiwan. It's such a humid place. So we're thinking of like what is a way to you know, copy these mechanisms. And then further, we also looked at other inspirations like the behavior of various animals, and specifically, we looked at sea otters. So we were thinking about mimicking how, I don't know if you guys know, but when sea otters like sleep, they kind of grab onto like this kelp. That's kind of what keeps them, kind of like tethered. And they also like hold hands when they're like floating around. So we decided to mimic this characteristic and their behavior in our design as well. Um, as you can see, like we talked about holding hands, entangling themselves in the kelp, giant seaweed. Um, and then we also looked at other these designs specifically we actually didn't use, but this kind of shows the iterative process because we looked at all these different ideas and designs, and then afterwards we were able to narrow down what we really liked, what we didn't like, and then for instance we also looked at water striders. So they're able to run on water because of the very tiny microscopic hairs on their legs. I think, one pattern I'm definitely seeing is like animals that are has to do with like water, or is like water like repellent, or if their skin is like very waterproof. A lot of the times it has to do with like these really tiny structures that's super interesting to study and learn about. Another part is we also learned of shark skin. So actually if you look at shark skin at a very tiny level, you'll see that it's made up of very like these like grooves, and kind of it looks like scales honestly, but it's like super tiny. You can't see it with like your just like with your eyes. And then this actually allows them to have like better water flow, if that makes sense. So it helps minimize drag on the shark. So we studied a lot of these very small details, and we, looked into it a lot. And then, for instance, this is our first design. It was like this huge apartment building. But then after we were able to get some feedback on our designs, like I said, this iterative process, getting feedback, changing our design, and then we decided on these individual units. And we also use like Tinker to like basically um, do like a 3D model, and we're also able to print it out and test it a little bit. And then another example of, oh, and basically this is what it looks like. So this is when there's no flood, and this is when there is a flood. And we were able to design it. So we thought about like, how is the piping going to work? How is it going to be powered? How do we make sure it doesn't like tip over, etc. And these were things that we ran by a couple scientists and engineers. And similarly, I use this to expand my impact, as you can do as well. And here's like another example of um, basically something that I worked on, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but it was in my freshman year of high school. So I don't know if you guys know, but especially if you're in the Bay Area, you'll know that due to like a lot of torrential rains. I think it was in 2021, I believe, or 2022. There was like huge, like it was like a lot of rain in the winter season. So I kind of, at the time, I read about this issue of microplastics in my region. So especially because of all of this rain, it's washing away a lot of like tire, I don't know what's called, but tire bits from when we drive. There's a lot of microplastics on the road. And also, there's a lot of microplastics everywhere, I would say. But it was washing a lot of microplastics into our bay, like millions of microplastics, especially due to the rain and like the heavy like runoff and water flow. So I decided I wanted to do something about that. And again, I identified this issue in my community that I saw my community being affected by. Um, and then I kind of looked at various designs. I looked at like the swordfish. It's how dynamic it is like in the water, how like water currents. I looked a lot for this project, looked a lot at how water currents like move and stuff like that, which I think was really interesting. I looked at a cross flow filtration system. So something that was pretty cool that I got inspiration by was there are some whales and like manta rays or various fish, like the blue tilapia, which I specifically looked at. As you can see, I did like a little drawing here. But essentially, how they filter feed. Essentially, you know how some whales like they eat krill and stuff like that. So they filter feed and they eat like plankton and stuff like that. Very very tiny like organisms. So how it works is they have these across their gills and across the inside of their mouths. They have this shape. Um, they have the shape. It's hard to describe because I don't have a video, but you guys can definitely look into it after this workshop. I think it's so, so cool. But they have this shape along inside of their mouths where when food comes over, like the reason why it doesn't escape is because obviously they need to keep particles in, like their food in, while keeping the take bring the water out, right? Or also just be like eating all the water, if that makes sense. Um, so how that works is the food particles come in and it kind of bounces off of these grooves, which keeps it in, if that makes sense. And then whereas there's these tiny like pockets along those grooves where like the water is able to escape. And that was basically my mechanism that I was inspired by to collect microplastics. And then similarly, this is another drawing that I had. I also looked at um, Christmas tree worms. Oh, I don't have a photo of this, but they're these worms where they have these little like um, I don't know how to call it, but they look like a Christmas tree. Um, and then they kind of embed themselves in these rocks. And then when food comes along, they kind of have this like little system going where it's like little, imagine like little tiny hands and they're like passing food around their bodies until it reaches their mouths. So I kind of was inspired by this conveyor belt mechanism that they had as well. Um, and this is another example of I also was able to use a 3D printer and kind of take advantage of my resources. And it was a 3D printer at school and really prototype and show this to various. I basically kind of interviewed or talked with I believe like two scientists, I think. I also reached out like on LinkedIn to see if there's anyone I wanted to run my design by, and then I got a lot of good feedback. I also reached out to teachers at my school to give me feedback, and it was really that's really really helpful because, for instance, there's this one mechanism right here that I wanted to be like the power of my device. And this is also, I designed this to attach on the fronts of boats. Like I was thinking if we had this program where, boat owners can attach this on and then they can somehow have these collecting stations and basically there's a bag inside and then every time you're able to turn in a bag in, you're able to get like a few dollars from the government, something like that. So yeah, that was basically the program that I had incorporated in my project. But essentially, there's some designs that I did in the beginning that actually did not work, but I didn't know because I mean, obviously, I'm not like I'm not like a expert on how like water flows. I'm not an expert on a lot of specific areas that scientists or my teachers would be. So they were able to point out like flaws in my design, like, oh, this wouldn't work, like, oh, what is feasible, what is actually not feasible. And then afterwards, I was, yeah, basically able to 3D print it. That was my first 3D printed design. It was quite tiny, but it was able to help me really envision what I wanted to do. And then after, as you can see, like this was my first one, if that makes sense. And then you can probably see it looks different from this one, which is actually my final design over here. I changed the motor to be attached to the front part, and this would actually be able to spin as you move through the water. Whereas this, I don't know if you guys can see the problem, but as water passes, like this does not spin because there's water pushing this way, there's water pushing this way, and it's just not a working motor, if that makes sense. So yeah, I went through this reiterative process, and I'm currently also working with some of my ideas right now to hopefully create like a further working prototype and to possibly test. I'm hoping to test it in some maybe some rivers or regions I'm able to. Um, but I'm trying to make basically dumb down or basically simplify this as design by a lot, or at least use the components I was inspired by to create something else. So it is like an ongoing process. And then what's super cool was that I was actually able to win first place nationally for this design. I was yeah able to like prototype it. I was able to talk to various professionals in the Bay Area about it uh, to kind of spread this idea and get feedback. And then there's a competition. I would say it's a pretty good and pretty big competition now. It's called the Biomimicry Youth Design like Challenger Competition. Um, so I competed in the 2022 to 2023 cycle, and I was able to earn first place nationally, which I was like really happy with and super proud about. And I think what really helps with this and what really helped was gain more awareness about this issue that I care about. So after I won this, I saw that there are people in LinkedIn like posting about my project, and I felt like that was really powerful because it's through that this issue of microplastics is kind of seen more or cared about more. This was a feature I had on the University of Minnesota, their website, as well as some of other websites that you can check out. Um, this is a website, Nature Ask. Oh, I can drop the link in our chat later, but it's a really, really amazing website that has a bunch of products inspired by nature. So that's like a great place to like read when you're bored, or if you want to get some inspiration or see what other people are doing. That's a super cool place to look at. Yeah, and then this is another feature that I had. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of a bit about biomimicry. Later, I think if we have time, we're going to do like a short, like um, 5 minute like brainstorm maybe. But yeah, now we're on to app design. And yeah, Andra, if you wanted to take it away.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me. And so I guess I'll talk a bit about my experience. So I developed this app called SunScan, and it's basically just an app that pulls from an API or a database, and it gives users their information on the UV index. So it's a sun safety app. And I developed it because I was very interested in outdoor workers' risk in melanoma because they spend so much time outside. And so I thought to myself, what would be something that could be free, that could possibly help them out a little bit and keep them informed? And so I decided to make an app for that. And so I'll be talking a little bit about the overall process, the brainstorming process as well, because I think that's almost as important as being able to actually develop your app. And yeah. So, when you're developing your app, you really do want to keep like a user-centered approach because you do want to think, how accessible is this app going to be? Are people going to use it? If like just because you develop it, it might not be the most like optimal resource. So you do want to make sure like maybe you consult others about your approach to this problem and see if it makes sense to them or if there's anything that you can add that would help the user in their journey because you do want to make it as accessible as possible. You also want to keep it very targeted to your audience because when people develop apps, most of the time they're solving a problem. And so you just want to make sure that this problem within your audience really resonates with them, and that it's something that they can actually make of use and that'll push them to download your app. I also forgot to mention really quickly that my app won the Congressional App Challenge. And so if you guys have already developed an app or are interested in doing more with your app, you can definitely apply for the Congressional App Challenge as well. And that really just helps sort of bolster the credibility behind your app and can help you with college applications. I think finding awards can be a little bit difficult, so that really helped me out as well. Um, Also, before you develop your app, you want to have some experience with user interface because, like I mentioned before, you want to make sure that your app is user-centered and very easy to approach and I guess not too difficult. So you might want to familiarize yourself with either Swift, which is a coding language if you want to develop it for Apple, or Kotlin, which is another language that's used for Android Studio development. I developed my app using Android Studio because it seemed more beginner friendly. If those of you have already taken a computer science class, either computer science A, I'm not sure that Principles teaches Java, but I know that computer science A does teach Java. So if you are more familiar with Java, which is a pretty um, beginner language that I think a lot of people do start to learn first, either that or Python, then I think that using Android Studio Code could be a better option for you. But if you're interested in taking some more time to learn, and I think that if you make your app targeted towards Apple, there's also a um, Apple App Challenge, I believe. So you can apply to that as well if you do develop your app in Swift. So it really just is about what your ultimate end goal is, what kind of audience you're trying to reach. For me, I really just wanted to make sure that I would be able to publish my app at all. And so I felt like Android Studio would be sort of easier route. And also, you want to take in mind you do need to make time for testing to make sure that your app is plausible, it doesn't have errors. Like for me, when I was pulling from my database, which is an API that you connect your app to, which I can talk a little bit more about later. I was having some issues because it turned out I made like a really simple mistake in my code. I was only pulling numbers and giving an output for like flat numbers, so like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I wasn't including decimals because the UV index typically has like it is not always an exact number. So whenever it wasn't a singular number, nothing would display. So you want to make sure that you take into account all of the options and make sure that your app works from different approaches, just to make sure, because sometimes you make really silly mistakes like that, and you definitely don't want to publish your app like that and then have to go through the process of updating it. So you do sort of want to make sure that you can foolproof your app a little bit. And yeah, so if you develop an app, you can really just take the next step to make a true impact in your community. I didn't know how I wanted to help outdoor workers. I just knew that I did want to help them. And so I was so happy when I found out, like, oh yeah, I can develop an app. And so don't be discouraged. It might sound a little bit big and a little bit scary, but there's a lot of YouTube tutorials. You can reach out to me if you have any questions. And it's definitely a way that you can make an impact. I think a lot of people do want to make a change, but they're not quite sure how. They don't know if they should engage in research, if they should start a nonprofit. So if you want to make a change or you've recognized a problem and you think that you can turn it into an app, you most likely can, and there's always a lot of guidance, so don't be afraid to take that next step.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Andra, I was just wondering if you wanted to share. So, what would do you think would be like what level of like coding experience would you need to have to start making an app? And then if you wanted to share more about like the process, like the technical process or side, I know you already shared a few like I think platforms. I'm not really familiar with like CS or anything like that. But yeah, like what would kind of be like the kind of action like items or like steps one would probably have to take to start embarking on this journey?
Yeah, great question. I didn't have much experience. Developed my app, I think, like the beginning of my junior year. It took me, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 months. And that was when I had first started computer science A. So I was taking the class and sort of developing my app. So I didn't have much background knowledge. I think a lot of the times YouTube is really helpful. They make, especially so if you're trying to develop your app in Kotlin, which is one language, or Swift, which is another language, they make it very like beginner friendly. Um, and so YouTubers also give it like uh, bit by bit tutorials on how you can understand the language. And I think now, which would have been super useful, there's ChatGPT, which can help you basically rewrite your code. So if you're running into any errors, you can just ask AI or even ask AI to generate some lines of your code if you're stuck. And so I think that it could be a lot easier now as a beginner because I developed my app maybe 2 or 3 months into my computer science class, so I really had no background experience. Um, so yeah, I think that using AI as a resource would be really helpful. And I wouldn't say to use it for everything because you can run into some issues with AI, but I would say that not to shy away from developing an app and using AI as a resource.
Mhm. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Okay. Well, I think next we wanted to take maybe like 5 minutes to brainstorm a little bit. I don't know if this would be, maybe we could save this for the end if we have any time, but yeah, I guess now we just have about maybe 10 to 15 minutes for any questions for anyone. Like you can also ask about you can ask like specific questions. You can ask about your personal project. You can be like, oh, like I have this, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I see like there's stuff in the chat. I don't know if it's actually, oh, I think, um, Velcro. Um, yeah. So yeah, if you guys wanted to, ask in the chat or unmute, if there's a certain, for instance, if there's a project you're working on right now that you want some advice or guidance on, you can feel free to ask that. If you have any questions at all. Personally, I'm not like I actually am just getting into like trying to understand computer science a little bit more. So it's super cool to have Andra here with us today. And if you guys didn't know, both of us are engaged in research, which is super fun as well. So if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to put it in the chat. Um,
Okay, so the question is, did you work on your project alone or was it a team thing? I worked on my project alone. So I can say that it might be easier if you're developing a smaller app to have a singular person working on the app as opposed to a team. I think it can be helpful, for example, if you have a computer science teacher or sort of a mentor to help look at your code or see what sort of issues you're having, or also, again, using AI to sort of determine what kind of issues you're having in your code. But I think when you're working on a smaller project like an app, it can help to have a small team of one or maybe two people, per se. But if you're working on something like a website or um, sort of like a different type of app that might have more components to it. Maybe having a team of maybe 2 to 3 people might help. I would just recommend trying to keep it small. If you have somebody who wants to help work on the app with you or something like that, then by all means, like have a team. It's very helpful to have feedback and criticism, but keeping the team small just sort of helps you determine what goals and what steps that you want to take and a little bit faster. And because the process of developing an app doesn't take too long, depending on what you're trying to do. Like my app, I would say, is more on the basic side. I'd recommend just keeping your team smaller so that you can make sure that you're working towards your goals in an ample amount of time. Okay, so the question is, how would you go about starting to code something? Sorry, my throat is a little bit bad. I'm getting over a cold, but I would recommend, like I mentioned before, watching YouTube tutorials. Those are so helpful. Um, I'll go back and look into what account I watched because um, the guy that I watched would actually run you through tutorials and have you like code alongside him. And that was really helpful for me to just like understand the process better. Or even if you have knowledge in maybe a prior language that isn't the language you decide to use to develop your app, that background knowledge can be very helpful as well. But when you're deciding to start your project, I think it can be one of the bigger hurdles to start as opposed to, actually coding and developing your website or your app. And so I'd recommend maybe looking on YouTube for sort of starter apps. That was what helped me with mine. I found like a sort of basic starting code on GitHub, which is very useful for coding. So if you do want to get into computer science, or web development, I'd say that getting a little bit more familiar with GitHub can be helpful as well because a lot of people have projects on there that you can sort of tweak into your own thing. because they provide open source code. But I'll go look for the account right now because the guy that I watched was super helpful, and I don't think I could have developed my app without him.
Do you have like a link or something of like maybe like something on the Congressional App like challenge thing that we could
Oh
like look
yeah.
at your app or kind of see more of your work?
Okay, I'll share the link just to the website in case people want to apply. And if they're curious about my app, I'll share um, the page on my app. And what sucks about this web page is that there used to be a video of me explaining my app, but I don't think it's loading anymore. So the website still does explain what my app does, but unfortunately, because the video is no longer loading, you can't really see the step-by-step walkthrough of my app.
Oh, is it on like YouTube or something or no?
Yeah, I think it should be, so I'll just check.
That's super cool. I'm reading the description right now.
Thank you. I think I might have it on my personal website, so let me see. Okay, I do have the video in my Google Drive of the app that I had uploaded. Um, From there, you can see some of my code and you can see me running it and showing what my app does a little bit. I'm not too sure if I go too in depth over the development process, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about that as well.
Oh, and then I think there's another question. Um, Someone asks, do you think I can learn a programming language and create an app alone in just 3 months? We have a festival of projects in 3 months, and my plan has not yet been implemented.
Yeah, I think once again, it sort of depends on what type of app you're trying to develop. Mine was fairly simple. I was just pulling information from an API database, and then from there, I was giving output based on what the information was. And so that took me, I think, 2 to 3 months. So if you're doing something uh, where the output can be fairly simple, um, I think that 2 to 3 months is manageable. But if it's a little bit more in depth or you're trying to add a few more features, sorry, I think that maybe having a team to maybe a smaller team to sort of help you propel that process a little bit faster could help. Or maybe asking for help from a computer science teacher, just because it can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes app development can be a little quick, and then sometimes it can take a long time depending on what you're trying to build exactly.
Yeah, does anyone else have any more questions or anything like that? Oh, yeah, so for 3D printing, back then I used like Tinkercad, but I'm trying to learn how to use like the regular like CAD better, like CAD various platforms. But I would say if you're new to like 3D printing, Tinkercad is really, really useful. Let me see if I can like search up, but it's like super like useful. Like I would say like even like people in like I'm pretty sure like students in elementary school that are first getting into 3D printing can do it, but it's pretty like yeah, it's like pretty easy to use. Like there's like already like blocks that you can work with, and then yeah, let me see if I can get into my account. But if not, yeah, basically Tinkercad. It's like super easy to use. And then this I don't know if anyone here is in the Bay Area, but if you're in the Bay Area, where everything's sort of small and kind of like the yes community, this is something I was going to talk about at the very end after everyone's questions. But we're going to start like kind of like a mentorship program where you can get mentorship on maybe possibly like specific projects. Specifically for me, if anyone is interested in doing like the youth. Like the youth design challenge. I think for this year. They might have already submitted it in February or something. So it's kind of too late to start a project now. But if you're interested in doing that competition in the 2025 to 2026 cycle, meaning that you register sometime in August or September. If you're interested in doing that and you wanted to get like brainstorming or kind of get in the process, and even like throughout that time, um, I would be totally willing to help like mentor some students and basically help a little bit more because there's a whole like portfolio you need to write. I can kind of give you tips, help give you some resources if you're interested in doing the that what is it, that competition. But definitely it is like a, I would say, a pretty competitive somewhat competition. Um, I know this year's winners, I believe they created, it was about, yeah, I don't know. It was team in South Korea. Personally for me, I definitely, like Andra mentioned, I personally like working by myself, or I like working with one other person, like one other person that I like trust and like am pretty like good with working with. Because I don't know, just for me, I don't like working with other people's schedules, if that makes sense. And what I feel like is would be such a hassle if it's like two people are really like kind of, if two people are kind of stubborn on this particular like aesthetic or this branding or a choice or something. Yeah, kind of just gets a little bit messy. But yeah, if you're interested in doing the youth design competition, definitely check it out. The winners in the past years. Also, like I definitely think it's getting like it is like a pretty competitive competition. The winners before me, I believe they actually talked to their like even like city like mayor and stuff like that and tested it with their city. So there's a lot of like implementation with this project and the portfolio you make has to be pretty like in depth. I believe it's maybe 10 to 12 pages long. So I literally like made the font as small as I could make it and it was still readable and try to just squish everything in there. Um, but yeah, let me know if anyone's interested in doing that or even just learning more about it. But yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, that is super cool. And I don't, yeah, maybe I'm the only one in the Bay Area region, but if anyone is in the Bay Area region, I also have some connections with some people in like city councils and the government. Oh, that's so cool. So yeah, like if you're in the Bay Area region and you're interested in the youth design competition or something like that, um, yeah, through like the program that I'm hoping to start. And we probably wouldn't be able to mentor like too many students if we want to actually like take it seriously. Um, but yeah, if you're like in Bay Area region and if you have any what is that like anything you want to do, I could help connect you with a couple like city council members that I am working on projects with, not relating to this, but um yeah, and then also if anyone's in the Bay Area region that wants to test out 3D printing, if you're close enough, I might be able to help get that done for you if you have a design that you want to print. That what is it? That if your school doesn't have one. Okay, and then if anyone, if no one else has any other questions, we're kind of closing this out now. It's been 15 minutes and it's been such an amazing workshop and experience. If you guys have any other like specific questions, definitely on like app design, definitely reach out to Andra. Like her work is so amazing. If you have any questions on like 3D printing or getting some resources or the biomimicry, definitely reach out to me. Make sure you're a part of our Discord server. So in that server, we basically announce all of our, various activities. We actually recently had, what is it, like a giveaway? Like somebody won like a $5 gift card, which is super cool, just like for free. Um, and and yeah, and then if for all of you guys can get like a certificate for from Everything Starts Small. So Everything Starts Small is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. So the Youth Empowerment Society is something that we, along with other organizations, had started as like a kind of side project and kind of building a community. But yeah, if you guys collect enough hours, we're also able to help certify the Presidential Volunteer Service Award. Like we can help certify your hours and then help you get that award. But the bronze, as you guys probably know, is like 100 hours. Um, so I don't know. So if you do this and if you like volunteer in other ways. Oh, also, if you're in our Discord community and if you give, if you're at a certain level, meaning that your activity is at a certain level, and if you give advice in our advice channel, you can also get volunteer hours for that. Um, yeah, like if you're actually giving helpful advice to people, you can get volunteer hours for that. So that's just a resource for you guys. But make sure you guys join the Discord server and definitely reach out. You guys can feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Um, and yeah, Andra, do you have any like closing remarks or anything?
Yeah, of course. Feel free if you have any questions. I put my Instagram in the chat so you can reach out to me at Project Connect Forum. And yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn if anybody has questions on app development or how I develop my website, Project Connect, or just anything that I might have done. I did research at NYU for in the cybersecurity lab. So if anybody has any questions on getting started in the field of computer science, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And once again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Well, yeah, I think that's basically it for our workshop today. Yeah, if you guys have any questions on research, and also if you're in our community, if you have a specific topic you want us to do a workshop on, like we're totally up for doing that. Like if you're like, oh, I want a step-by-step process on how to get started on app design. If you want a step-by-step process on, we want to start one on how to write a research paper. Um, since we've both done like research before and stuff like that. So yeah, if you have any like requests for workshops or anything, or if you have a speaker that you want to listen from, like I can also help possibly try to reach out and help get you guys that speaker. But yeah, thank you guys so much for coming today. It was really great to speak with you guys. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we should definitely all stay connected. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.